guests onto the virtual stage. So I asked ChatGPT to do little intros for me. So let's start with Enara Roy. ChatGPT calls her an empathy queen, a brand builder, and a wellness advocate. She does social at Sweet Loren's, my favorite cookie company. Enara, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello, guys. So nice to meet you all. I'm super excited to be here and just super cool seeing everyone tapped in from different cities. So I'm the social media and influencer marketing manager at Sweet Loren's. If you don't know us, we're the #3 cookie dough brand in America and the #1 natural cookie dough brand. So it's super allergen friendly and made with clean ingredients. So I do everything from our social strategy to finding super cool creators that we can work with. And I also do all of our community management, and we have over 200,000 followers across platforms. So it's always a fun job. And basically, the main purpose of the company is to kind of just bring people joy through cookie dough. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Enara. Thanks for being here. And I love the cookies. I love the brand. I love the work you do on social. Cool. Okay, so the next person we're going to get onto the stage, recurring guest of the Social Club, Josh Rangel. He does social at Ogilvy, just a tiny little agency, and ChatGPT calls him, quote, a strategy sharpshooter, a meme master, and a client whisperer. Josh, please introduce yourself in a way that is better than AI could.
I don't know. It did a pretty good job, I will say. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Rangel. I am a senior director of social at Ogilvy, where I oversee the strategic social strategy for some of our clients here. I have been in the social industry. I've been working in social, and Eric and I were talking about this the other day. I've been in since 2008. So I started when nobody knew what the heck we were doing, and have kind of evolved since then. I am also a fan of cookies and a fan of basketball and a fan of social. So I am really happy to be here, and to yap with y'all.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Great to have you back. You're a favorite guest of ours, and we were saying we should just turn this into a podcast and just make it a weekly thing. Why not? Cool. Another recurring guest who is awesome to have back on, fresh off of a playoff run with the Houston Rockets. Hannah Peery, ChatGPT calls her, quote, a creative playmaker, a content powerhouse, and a sports social media guru. Hannah, welcome to the Social Club. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Eric. So happy to be here. Yes, this is Josh and I's second panel together. Happy to be back on the stage with you. And I love the variety that we have in this panel today, from cookies to basketball to agency side. That's really, really cool. And love seeing where everybody's from in the chat. We've got a lot of people sending in messages. So that's really, really cool. But yeah, I've been with the Rockets, just finished up my 4th season with them. We went to the playoffs for our first time since I started with the team this year. So just finished up kind of a roller coaster of a season. Before that, I was at the University of Florida, did some work with ESPN before my time with the Rockets. So been in sports. Sports has kind of been all I've done for a really long time now. I also do a little bit of my own content creation. So yeah, I kind of like ChatGPT's description of me. I agree with a lot of that. But yeah, so I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. I guess I didn't do a quick intro of myself, but I'm Eric. I'm co-founder and president at Slate. We're a content creation platform for social media teams. Started Slate about 5 years ago, and before that, I was doing social and digital for the NFL, so also come from the world of sports. Cool. So we have a pretty diverse group here of different social media pros across different industries. It was something we were talking about actually just before this webinar started. Is it's very different to run social at a sports team than it is a cookie company, than it is at an agency. But there are common pressures that every social media pro faces, even from a big brand all the way down to a smaller challenger brand or even a startup. I'm noticing some similar challenges across social that I had when I was running feeds for the 49ers, and now I'm running an account with 1,000 followers. I guess, Josh, I'll start with you. You have a very broad perspective, especially across like the agency side where you're working with a lot of brands. What do you think is just some common challenges that every social media manager has to face, no matter what industry, no matter what type of brand they're creating content for?
Great question. And I think everyone that is in social on this call, and especially the folks that were, Hannah and Nara can attest, is that, and we talked about this the other day, I think there's no other profession that is expected to know everything about everything. The social media manager professional, you are expected to know every single platform. You are expected to know every single TikTok trend. You are expected to know everything about AI, all of the reporting, all of the social, all of the paid. And so that is one of the biggest things, is that the expectation on social pros is incredibly high. And one of the things that, I've learned over the course of my career and the experience that I've had is that you have to be okay. And Eric, you spoke about, you wrote about this the other day, is you have to be okay with admitting what you don't know. That is where growth comes. And one of the things you have to do is advocate for yourself, like, and allow yourself to advocate for yourself in that you tell your leadership or your boss that it doesn't mean we don't have to be on every single platform. We don't have to be in every single thing. We don't have to jump on every single trend. And so that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, especially over the course of my tenure in social. The expectations just have grown because it has become where nobody knew what they were doing to now it is very sophisticated from a social standpoint. And so those expectations have continued to grow. And I think that's one of the biggest things that probably everybody that is joining this call and everyone that is on this panel can attest to.
100%. Yeah, I guess, Enara, where do you go to stay up to date? How do you try to feel like you are in the know? And do you ever feel pressure, or have you ever felt pressure in your career to know everything? Like Josh is saying, I know I have in the past.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree with everything Josh is saying. And it's funny because I was actually at like an event with other social media people earlier this week. And the thing that kept coming up with everyone in different big companies, small companies, legacy brands, startups is the fact that we are all building the plane as we fly it. Like this industry is so new and it's changing every single day. And, something that worked last week could be a total flop this week. And there's excitement to it, right? Because like there's so much creativity and, you're always learning and always growing. But yeah, there is this pressure to constantly know everything. And it's funny because even a few weeks ago, I got curious and I searched on ChatGPT. I was like, what was it like being a social media manager in 2016? And I know for some of you OGs, like you were social media managers in 2016, but it literally showed me that even Instagram stories didn't even exist back then. Like that's when it just launched. And I'm like, every single year and day and week, these platforms are continuing to evolve. There's new strategies. And so like what goes from posting on maybe one or two platforms, now you're expected to know all the platforms and all the different kind of like facets within those platforms as well. But to answer your question, Eric, I think something that has been really useful for me is LinkedIn. I feel like somebody said that like being on LinkedIn feels like more productive. And I feel like that's true. Like I think instead of like scrolling on TikTok for 3 hours a day, trying to figure out what's the like cool trends and what other brands are doing, I feel like I can go on LinkedIn and thankfully there's so many other people that are kind of just summing it up for you. And like I feel like the information gets on there pretty quickly too. Like it's not delayed anymore like it used to. So I would say for me, I try to just go to places and areas where I can get consolidated information about what's going on in the industry, whether it's CPG or just social media as a whole, like what new updates, what are brands doing, like how can I get inspired, and what do I kind of need to keep a pulse on. So I would say for me, that's been a huge tool, as well as just newsletters, like hearing from other social media professionals and kind of like where do they get their resources and their kind of knowledge. So that's been helpful for me.
Yeah, totally agree. Hannah, do you ever feel pressure from even just like scrolling on social and the link, like looking at LinkedIn? And I don't know if you're on LinkedIn as much because you crush content on TikTok and Instagram, and those are more like your spaces. But I wonder if you ever feel like pressure of like, you see something, you're like, oh, that's a good insight, but then it leads to stress of like, oh crap, I need to know more about that. That feeling of like, it almost reminds you of how much you don't know when you like see and learn content. How do you kind of manage that pressure to always have to be the expert in everything at the Rockets or in any sort of role you do as a social media manager.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what Josh said earlier about being able to admit what you don't know. That was something that was really hard for me as somebody coming from doing it in college where I was working for some brands where I was one of a very small social media team, or in some instances, I was the only person running social media. So I really did feel that pressure and expectation of having to know everything. And I felt like I was really spreading myself too thin and not really mastering or excelling at any one thing because I was kind of focusing on too many things at once. And that is the position that a lot of people in social media are in. And so I'm glad I got that experience, and that definitely grew me for the position that I'm in today. But I do have the luxury of having a team now, and it kind of goes along with our like sports, what we do, and we work for a team. And so we are a very teamwork oriented social team. And I've also had the luxury of being able to grow up. I started 4 years ago with a couple of the people that are still on our social team today, and we've all grown together. And really, this is something we were talking about over the last couple of days because it's the end of the season. We're doing like self-assessments, we're doing team assessments. How can we grow over the off season? How can we improve processes and structure to be even better next season? And we've just gotten better and better season over season and really like grown into each of our niches. Like we have me who's really, specialized in organic content and strategy and player interaction things. And then we have one of our social people slash photographers, Trevor. He started with me as a social person, and he's kind of really grown into more of a photography role. And he also really helps us with memes. He's really into the meme culture and like up to date with every single meme that's popular right now. And sometimes that's something that I really don't feel like I have the capacity to keep up with because I'm trying to figure out how people are editing TikToks and how people are making their organic content more engaging. So I don't feel like I really have time to be looking at all the memes on Reddit and like being up to date of those kind of things. So we really complement each other well and lean on each other in those like instances where we need it. And we've been able to really grow and improve as a team. And it's just really cool to see everyone kind of come together and fall into their own niche and own it to the best that they possibly can. So yeah, so definitely feeling that pressure, but really just, lucky to have people around me that are so good at what they do, and we complement each other really well.
Amazing. Yeah, I think I saw a question come in from Loren in the chat earlier. Another part that is difficult about being a social media professional is your work is on display and judged literally every time you post it. You could see, was this a good idea or not in real time? Are you getting engagement? And there's a high to that, obviously, that kind of keeps you wanting to create more, but there's also a low to that. I guess, Josh, how do you deal with like having an idea that you're excited about, posting it, and it does no numbers and it flops?
It's easier said than done, but you have to, and this is a common, I feel like it's a common refrain, but you have to be okay with failure, and you have to be willing to reframe that as the flop is a lesson, right? You're taking the input that you've gotten from that or lack of it and thinking, what can I learn from this for the next time? Yes, it's a hit to the ego, especially if you were the one that created it. It didn't resonate, but there are a lot of factors that go into it that maybe why it didn't. But if you're willing to reframe your thinking of, all right, what was it about this that didn't work? What were the things that did? What was the comments that came in that said this was some XYZ? So reframing your mindset to saying it's okay if it flops because it's a lesson in disguise, that has helped me from a personal and professional standpoint of thinking about how I can learn from those things. And it comes with time. It's not easy to do. I'm not gonna say that it is. But that is one thing. And I think that we as social professionals, there's a mix of data and vibes, right? Sometimes we just feel it in our guts. We know something's gonna work and we say we gotta run with this. But sometimes the data tells us that too. And when a post flops, the data is public. Like you're saying, more than any other industry, again, what social pros put out there is for public display. If an accountant makes an error, nobody outside is seeing that, right? But if we make an error, if somebody, if we misspell something, if we make an offhand comment, it's out there. So, but just kind of reframing your mindset to think of those low performers or those flops as lessons.
Totally. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Any specific anecdotes as to when something may have happened that you thought was going to crush, or just how you deal with it in general?
Yeah, I was just gonna add in that I made a post on LinkedIn about this recently that was like me when a post goes viral. Yeah, that makes sense. Me when a post flops. Yeah, that makes sense. But like, does it really make any sense? Who knows, right? Like, I think to Josh's point, like there are so many outside factors, right? It could be these complex algorithms that we're still trying to figure out. Was it the posting time? Was it just that the content didn't resonate? So I feel like, trying to find that balance of like taking everything as a learning kind of experience. And, I do truly believe that like if your content isn't performing, that means there's an opportunity for it to improve. But I also do feel like, unfortunately, that's just some things that are tied to the job. There's a lot of things that are just outside of our control. So kind of once you accept that and just, try to lean in into learning and being curious about how you can improve, I think that can really help.
Totally.
I was just gonna add a little bit to that. I love what Anara was saying about all of the outside factors that you can't really control, and you can spend hours on something and really hit on a trend and do everything you possibly can right, and then it just flops for no explainable reason. So can totally relate to that. But for us, there's a different version of flopping, and it has a lot to do with the on-court product and what's happening with the story of the team. And sometimes, and actually at all times, that is something that we cannot control whatsoever. So
Yeah.
people, of course, come to us, and it could be a really amazing piece of content that someone spent hours editing this video or taking this picture or editing together a really unique swipe or whatever it may be. And then the team loses or a player performs really poorly, and everyone comes to that post to negatively comment about it or just bring negativity in general. And that's something that we have to protect ourselves from a lot, is remembering that says nothing to do about our work, and that we just got to keep on trucking, because that's the great thing about social and social in general, is that things filter out so quickly, but especially the NBA, so many games, and there's just, you turn a new page every 24 hours, literally. People forget about what happened the next day. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Totally. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know for me personally, I get way more like full of myself after a post that does well, and a post that does bad. I'm like, whatever. They didn't understand. They didn't understand me. The next one will hit. Okay, we're gonna bring some people onto the stage to ask some questions. I think we'll start with Tyler Cox. If you can unmute yourself, introduce yourself to the group, and ask your question. I think you're muted there, Tyler. Yeah.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Pleasure being here. Loving the conversation and this platform right now. So my question is, and I was a director of marketing growth over at Vayner Speakers for a few years. Now I'm doing social media consulting for speakers and small businesses. But so all of this is incredibly helpful, and I'm constantly following your guys' posts. But my question is, with trends moving so fast, how do you decide what to jump on and what to ignore, even when clients or leadership think we should do this?
Great question. Great
Thanks,
question,
guys.
Josh.
Yeah, I'll jump in, but obviously would love Enara and Hannah's perspective. I think, it's difficult, but the question I always ask is, by jumping on this trend, are we making it better? Are we adding to it, or just adding volume to the trend, right? So if you can make it better, if you can add to it, if you can add a unique perspective, that's a win right there. And also, what we like to do with our team is put it through a filter, make sure that it's relevant for the brand, make sure that it's sticky enough for us. And so there are a couple of factors that go into that in deciding whether or not to jump on a trend. And I think for brands too, it's increasingly important that relevance for that brand in that trend is there, because if it's not, you run the risk of being silence brand, or it could come off as cringe, right? So making sure it goes through a couple of filters, but then also realizing that there's going to be another trend in like 15 minutes. If you miss out on this one, if this one isn't right, there's going to be 30, 40, 50 more during the week. And a couple of those are going to be right for your brand. And those are the ones that are going to stick. But for me, it's all about adding value versus adding volume.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think there's often so much pressure, especially internally, right, to hop on trends. Like everyone sees a trend and they're like, sending the links around internally. Should we do something about this? Should like people who aren't in social, right? And they're like, why aren't we involved in this trend that I keep seeing all over my feed? And I think it's good to set those expectations up front too. Like, hey, this is our kind of thought pattern of how we react to trends. And, it doesn't make sense for our brand. Can we add to the conversation? Do we even have time today to drop everything to do it? There's a lot of factors that go into just saying like, okay, let's like shift everything to have some creative idea and like, have chat GPT like roast our team or do, Bratz dolls of the people in our brand. There's things like, and they happen so quickly every day. And honestly, most of the time, like the best you can hope for is getting some engagement and like people like it for a little bit, but it's not usually going to add to like your overall kind of brand presence. So I'm personally kind of like against them unless they really, really make sense, or you're kind of needing content. Curious, Hannah, how you approach it with the team at the Rockets.
I completely agree and second everything you guys just said, just making sure that it makes sense for the brand, prioritizing the ones that you think you can really hit out of the ballpark rather than just doing it to do it. Because like you said, it's a little bit of engagement. Is it worth the investment? Do you have the time to focus on that? And during the season, that is rarely the case for us. We rarely have time to drop everything to do a trend. So when we do it, it's something that we know is going to hit hard with our audience, and something that we try and focus on is very niche trends. I think you can get overwhelmed with how many different trends there are, and I'm somebody who likes to scroll TikTok personally and get inspired for my own brand. And there's a lot of things that a lot of limitations to consider too. There's a lot of trends that we unfortunately, even if we really really wanted to and it made sense for our brand, just can't do because of copyright, whether it's a meme or whether it's music. They're very very strict about that and becoming more and more strict about that with sports teams. So sometimes we're limited in that sense, but really just focusing on the niche trends that we can do. So following like sports meme accounts and getting inspired by those, or listening to what our fans are talking about. And sometimes our fans jump on trends and help us be inspired in that way too. And so really just kind of niching down to specific trends rather than paying attention to everything that's going on. Like you brought the Bratz doll example. So that would literally make no sense for our brand at all. So just kind of filtering out those things and just, like I said, focusing on the ones that we know we can really hit out of the park. So.
Totally. Yeah, that all makes a ton of sense. Okay, I want to shift gears for a second and talk a little bit about a unique pressure to be like always on in social media. So obviously we talked about feeling like you always need to be in the know. And part of always being in the know is like up to date on everything that's happening because social is so real time, let alone just needing to, whatever brand you're creating content for, keep the feeds lit up and creating content what feels like 24/7. Enara, I want to bring back something you said actually in a meeting with just this group when we were talking about the webinar and prepping for the webinar. I mentioned that I just came back from pat leave. And do you want to talk a little bit about what you said and kind of what your thoughts were in terms of like a potential future for you, like taking time off and maybe some anxieties around that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very real thing. Like, I think as social media managers, like, for me, I have anxiety just taking the weekends off. Like, I have to constantly remember that, like, it's a 9 to 5. Like, I'm deserve my time off from the 5 to 9 and on the weekends, just as anyone else. And obviously, with this job, there's gonna be days where you're just online or you have to post something at odd hours and or weekends. But it's hard because I feel like things in social move so fast and you feel like you need to move at that pace too. But at the end of the day, like we're humans, like we can't, and we're not like supposed to be using our creative juices 24/7. And yes, the feed, it requires so much from you, right? Like you need to be always on, you need to be always trying to think of ways to go viral. But at the end of the day, like your creativity is a muscle. And if you're sore after the gym, you have to give it time to rest and recharge. Like that's truly just like a fast path to burnout if you're just always trying to be on and on. But yeah, I think, kind of what we were talking about for me, just like as a woman in the industry, I was kind of always like scared of like, well, what happens if I, want to go on maternity leave for like a year or two? Like, can I even jump back into socials after that? Like, think about how much has changed just from now between now and 2023, right? But I think at the end of the day, like, I think there are some core principles to social media and community building that will always remain the same, no matter how much these platforms change and evolve. And so I think that if you are a creative person and you know what you bring to the table, the hope is that even if you need to take time off for whether it's maternity or paternity leave, or just maybe it's something, more personal, or you just feel like traveling for a year, right? That you don't need to be tied to the shackles of just like always on social media. Like you will be able to jump back in. But I would love to hear from Eric and Josh because I know you guys have taken paternity leave and kind of like what that's looked like.
I'll lean on Josh for that.
Well, it's more fresh in your mind, I will say, but I do remember, obviously, I do remember that. And I think you make a great point is like there is that anxiety and that fear that you're going to fall behind. But I think, Enara, you kind of hit it on the head is that if you master the basics of the social strategy, the things there, you're always going to be fine because you're going to be able to catch up on whatever trend or new slang term there is there that may or may not actually be relevant in a year. So as long as you master the basics of understanding social at its core, you're going to be fine. And I think one of the lucky things for me from Pat leave standpoint is like the kid sleeps a bit, right? So you're able to kind of catch up on certain things. And one of the things for me is I do enjoy social media as a practice in general. So it's like it doesn't feel like work. It feels like I'm just educating myself. And that's how I frame it is I'm staying educated. I firmly believe I haven't been in school in longer than probably some of the folks on the call have been alive. But I feel that my education has never stopped because I want to continuously learn. And so that's how I frame it. But at the same time, just understanding that as long as you get the basics down, you're going to be able to catch up because some of the things that you might have missed are probably no longer relevant anyway.
Totally. Totally. Anna?
I did want to jump in. Enara said
Please.
something that made me feel like I have to answer. She said, "This is a 9 to 5," and I need to remind myself of that. My job cannot be further than a 9 to 5, and that's honestly something I love about it, actually, but something that you have to learn to balance. And I saw someone mentioned in the chat asking how you work in sports, and you're working nights and you're working kind of all around the clock and just balancing that. And that's a question I get a lot. And I'm always pretty real about the fact that I like do not have an answer to it as someone who works in sports. And so our like we don't have any set hours that we're working. Like we're talking in our group chat, talking about posts, scheduling posts from 11, sometimes our games on the West Coast will not end until 1 a.m. and I'm working remotely until 1 a.m. And then we need to make, we win game 4 and we need to make a ticket post the next morning at 8 a.m. And so like, you never know what the schedule is going to look like. And that's something that I enjoy about the job, but it's something that is also really difficult to balance with life and to really like prioritize, decompressing, as this person asked. It's very difficult. And as someone who also runs a brand for myself on the side and does my own content, I almost never turn it off. It's very, very challenging. And I think people expect an answer like, oh, I have this perfect solution and a perfect structure to make sure I'm very balanced and everything in my life is that's just not the case, unfortunately, for me. So instead of looking at like balancing throughout the day and how I can like schedule time, we kind of look at it as an NBA schedule, and we have a schedule of the year and what we know is our schedule is gonna look like. So we know during the season we're gonna be grinding. We know during the playoffs we're gonna be grinding times 10. But when the off season comes, that is our time to decompress. That is our time to work very hybrid and maybe work a half day multiple times a week. That is something that when you have a really good manager in sports and they recognize how hard you're working and really the mental load that you have in the season, they really give you that time to decompress in the season. So right now, we're kind of focusing on that a little bit more, focusing on ourselves. And I have a vacation planned. I always look forward to that. So yeah, it's just something that I unfortunately have not figured out. If anyone wants to give advice on that, would love that. But yeah, I just want to be real about that. It's just really not something that I have at all. So
I will jump in and say you will never have it all figured out. And it is 100% okay to not have the answers to everything. And that comes with time. And obviously some of us are luckier than others with our leadership. And I completely and empathize with that. But, knowing that it's okay that you don't know everything and that, you don't have all the answers, because ultimately I will say I'm still figuring it out as I go, and many of us are. I'm looking out at some of my colleagues over here. We're all figuring it out as we go.
Okay, let's bring on some more people. Let's see, Eric Ford. Eric Ford, are you with us?
Love that
Yes.
headshot, by the way, I must say.
Oh, thank you. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Okay. I asked two questions, but I think my first question might be, I think my second question might be better for the conversation as of right now. Um, I know that as social media, there's a lot of roles that can be a part of the social media, or at least the social media team. One of my biggest things that I did previously when I was at L'Oreal, I used to be the global comms and advocacy manager. So I did PR, comms, influencer marketing, community management, etc. One of the biggest things was community management. And I feel like right now, one of the biggest words right now is community. And I want to understand, like, how are we reshaping a community engagement strategy on social? I think, sometimes people think that community is just someone commenting, but it's really about the net sentiment of your brand. There's a lot of reporting when it comes to social listening. I want to know, like, how have y'all's teams evolved that strategy? I think sometimes community management gets kind of like siloed and not really talked about when we talk about social media or influencer marketing, but it's one of the biggest things because it's the thing that's connecting to your consumer that's actually purchasing your product or your service or buying those tickets. So I would love to understand from like people in leadership roles, as I'm trying to get to a leadership role now, like what does that look like for evolving that strategy?
Yeah, amazing question. Okay, Enara, do you want to start and talk a little bit about community and how you approach? Because I feel like the Sweet Loren's brand has really developed a passionate community, and I feel like I could sense that from, the outside. I'm curious, no trade secrets, nothing like that, but just how do you approach this idea of community? I think Eric brings up a good point that it's kind of tossed around pretty
Yeah.
like flippantly, and it's almost like, does it mean like a Reddit forum where people could like chat amongst themselves? Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to you, and how do you approach it?
That is such an amazing question. And yeah, I mean, so many aspects to it, right? So I think one is definitely, yes, community is like just this broad term, like, is it like replying to your comments? Is it the social listening? I try to think of community as all of it. Like when I'm doing the social media posts, it's for the community. When I'm trying to tap in an influencer, it's to bring in their community into our community, right? And again, I know it sounds broad, but at the end of the day, you have to realize that like social media and influencers and all of it, it's like about people, right? So yes, you're representing a brand, but how can you do more things that are like human to human? So like for us, I mean, we do have a very dedicated community, and because we're a totally allergen friendly brand, like so for some people that have like severe dairy or egg or nut allergies, we're one of the only options they can have that they can safely have and know that they could just enjoy a sweet treat without like having to worry about any of this stuff. So I think to answer your question, it's a little bit hard on how to kind of sell it to leadership. I don't think we're fully there yet, but that's one of the things that I fully advocate for. I think like community and even just someone on your team that like surprises and delights people, like that should be its own role, right? And I think right now the struggle in social media is that it's all in one, right? So you're expected to do the social strategy, you're expected to do the influencer marketing and the community all at once. But I think as this kind of industry evolves, I think now brands are, I actually am starting to see more roles that are specifically community focused. And that's amazing. Like, and I think we definitely need more of that. But I would definitely love to learn from like kind of bigger agencies and bigger companies, like what that looks like.
Yeah, I will also say it's a great question, Eric, and I, for one, am also a big community management, community engagement advocate. At Ogilvy, we have a dedicated practice within our social group that is dedicated to community management, and that was one of the things that really pulled me towards this agency was their focus on community management. And you're right, community isn't just people commenting on your posts. It's so much bigger than that. A community carries your brand when you cannot, right? It's the fandom in my opinion. It's not just about your brand, but about what you represent. And you have to foster that community. You can't just broadcast, you have to engage, you have to reward, because somebody can start in your community as a passive viewer, not knowing, but then you can take them through and they become an advocate for you. And so the community isn't just about, in my opinion, isn't just about your brand, but it's about so much more within your industry. And engaging just out, and it's not just about engaging within, comments on your feed. It's proactive community engagement, right? What are the topics and interests that are relevant to your brand that other people are having? What conversations are they having? How can you join those conversations and help and support those individuals and community? And so for me, community carries, when you don't have an idea for social, like, man, we don't have content ready. Community engagement is always there for you, because you're not necessarily needing to create something from scratch. You're reacting or engaging with something else. And so I think for the community can be so much bigger if you simply just, if you feed it, and recognize it and nurture it, because I think it is a buzzword, but there's so many variables that go in. It's not just necessarily one person or a group of people, but it's kind of how you approach it. And I am a firm believer that the more you invest in community, the more they will invest in you, and it's just beneficial for your brand.
Totally. Yeah, it feels like community happens in smaller spaces, right? Whereas content is broadcast and you get a million likes or whatever, and it's like this one thing. Whereas community is all these like tiny little things, whether it's like something in person at like an activation that is like a passionate like area for your brand, or engaging with somebody directly in DMs who you've seen comment on something specific that you brought to your team and said, hey, this is something that we're hearing a lot. Let's like surprise and delight this person. Or even just that act of listening to what people are saying and bringing it back to your team internally to help like shape what you do is kind of rewarding your community without even necessarily having to like tout that you do that every time. So it feels like community is always going to be this like smaller one-to-one touch points, and that can happen on social, but it also can happen in person. And it's where social really flexes to be more than just posting content, right? It's more of a owning marketing, because it expands to customer service and in-person events and campaigns and all these other things. Hannah, how do you approach it with a kind of baked in audience community of like very avid fans, which comes with its own benefits, but also challenges?
Yeah, and I loved both the answers that Enara and Josh and Eric that you just said, and how important it is to build and foster the advocates for your brand, because that's essentially what we have. We have a really strong fan base and they have very strong opinions. And whether we win or lose, they're there in our comments telling us their opinions, or on their own platforms putting those opinions out there. And it's very big on X/Twitter for us specifically. We have a very loyal fan base that even through our rebuilding years, when we were at the very bottom of the standings, we're very active. They're hosting spaces every single day. They have hundreds of people in there discussing the team. And now obviously that we're, in the playoffs again, it's even bigger now. And so that's something that we definitely focus on. And I think that we can always be doing a better job at as well, is kind of rewarding those people. And that's something that we focused on in between the end of the regular season and the playoffs this year. We hosted a week of fan appreciation, and on Twitter specifically, we wanted to really reward our Twitter community, our X community on there. And so we were engaging with them a lot, and we actually had those X community members nominate a fellow X community member that they think has really shown and displayed really strong fandom, and we rewarded those people with playoff tickets to come to the game. So we that's a goal for us. And also going back to the audience listening part that you were just discussing, Eric, and really taking the ideas and the sentiment that people are talking about online and incorporating it into our strategy, that is so important for us, because obviously we are watching every single game. We know everything that goes on, but our fans may view something maybe a little bit different than we do internally, especially having a relationship with the team and the players. Like, we view things a lot differently than the fans do. So listening to what they're talking about and really trying to not be tone deaf, to not sugarcoat it. If they have a very specific, if they're, our fans are pretty sensitive, and fans, I think sports fans in general are pretty sensitive. So maybe there's a day when a player did something that, made them a little bit upset, and they're all expressing their feelings. And then if we go and make a post about that player the next day, it's not going to go over well. So really just paying attention to what everyone is saying every single day, and just staying on top of that sentiment is super important for us and how we do our job.
Yeah, great points. Okay, we're gonna bring on Isabel to ask a question. Isabel, do you mind unmuting, introing yourself, and asking your question?
Yes. So hi everybody. Thank you guys for hosting this today. So my question is for all of you. Actually, I'd love to hear for all of you if time still allots it. What are some tools, resources, and then pieces of advice that you'd recommend for anyone who is aiming to level up their career within social, especially if you have aspirations of eventually becoming a head or a director of social? So this could be within work and then also for outside of work also.
Amazing. Let's see, who wants to start with this one? I'll do a quick start and then pass it around. I would say one thing I always recommend for people looking to level up their career in social is to learn how to tell stories with data internally. It is really hard sometimes to prove the value of organic social, but all those things we were just talking about, it's like you get feedback from your customers every day. You are learning. Even if you did a post that flops, there's a story to be told of like, here's our strategy, here's what we tried, here's what it didn't work, and here's what we think this means going forward. And finding ways to use data, but even anecdotes to tell stories internally will help level up your career and just highlight the importance of the work you're doing. I'm not qualified to talk about tools because I'm biased, so I'm going to pass it to Josh.
Yeah, I will double click on kind of what Eric said about storytelling. You know, as a social pro, you are telling stories to your audience every day. You know how to shape that narrative. It's the same thing with your leadership, right? Learning how to tell those stories of what they're interested in, what matters to them. The audience, they have a little bit of a different interest. Your leadership, they're probably interested in growth, in revenue, in opening up new markets and doing these types of things. So if you're able to kind of tell that story of how what you're doing in social and tell that story to them, turning that data into a story, that will help your leadership look at social as a much more critical element of the marketing mix and of the organization, and will help then you move up that kind of area, whether it's in social, marketing, comms, or another part of the business. That will help you immensely because it will show that you know how to shape that narrative and that the things that you're doing do ladder up to business growth. And as far as tools, I'm not gonna say necessarily given that, you know, I know Eric's biased, but obviously the Slate is key. But I will say something that's not even really a tool, but something that is a gold mine, and I know we all know what it is, but how much we actually use it is Reddit. There is a subreddit for absolutely everything. There's gold mines worth of data and how your fans and how your audience is talking about your brand, the things that they're interested in. Deep dive, if you can't afford specific tools, Reddit is a gold mine for how you can uncover insights, how you're like, that is one way I would always like, how are people talking about the brand? How should the brand be speaking in social? Reddit's a gold mine for that. And obviously from a personal standpoint, I go in there and look at, you know, Chicago Bears, Bulls, you know, Cubs, you know, all those types of things that I'm interested in, dad jokes. But there is a subreddit for everything that you can learn from that is free of charge for you to kind of dig into.
Great advice. Sorry that you're a Chicago sports fan, Hannah.
It was great in the 90s.
Everything was great in the 90s, Josh.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Hannah, do you have thoughts on that?
So everything that Josh said is exactly what I was thinking. I just kind of have like a very like tangible example to give for that. So
Yeah.
when I first came in and I was very rookie, very fresh, my first year working for the team, making fun content every single day, fun memes, fun organic videos, taking videos of the players and making storytelling pieces and feeling like that was something that I had worked really hard to get to that point. But then eventually I had thought about career growth and like, what are the next steps for me? And how do I make this seem like less of a job that's just because everyone thinks that in social, you're just like posting videos and pictures and you're just having fun and that's really it. And what is the value? Like, you know, a lot of people don't really understand. So my thought was, again, how am I going to grow? how am I going to show that what I'm doing is valuable to the company and the business? And this is something that I have a really amazing director who kind of guided me through this and helped me learn in this way. Loren, some people that work in the sports world might know, he's a director for the Rockets, but he kind of taught me that, attaching, like really focusing on the business goals, like Josh was saying. So revenue generation, getting more corporate sponsors. So that was something that I really focused on. Like, how can I create and storytell in a way that is going to be a series or a piece of content that can be recurring, and that a sponsor would be interested in putting their logo on and paying us to continue to do. So not only am I making fun content and connecting with our audience and putting things out there that fans love, but I'm also bringing revenue back to the company. And as Josh was saying, like, that's what leadership cares about. Like, oh, you're bringing in money. Okay, I see the value. And that's essentially how I've been able to kind of grow and create new roles and opportunities for myself. So just like a hands-on example of how I learned what that meant for me, and then really applying it to be valuable to leadership.
Awesome. Amazing. Enara, any thoughts on that as well?
Just echoing all of this, I love all of it. I would say my biggest kind of tip is to work loudly. Like, I think in social, you're in it, you're in the grounds all day. You're doing all the work. You're seeing all the people that tag you and stuff. You're creating the content, you're responding to comments, but you can't assume that other people within your company, as well as, just in the world, kind of know what you're doing, right? And so at the end of the day, trying to kind of always show what you're doing rather than just like expecting that people know it, but also just remembering that other people, even within your company, are going to have different goals, right? So sales will have their own goals, leadership will have their own expectations. So kind of how can you craft the story to show that your work is not just quantitatively like helping? Obviously you can show the KPIs, yes, we're growing our community, X, Y, and Z, but also the qualitative is important as well, right? So if we get a comment where someone is like, oh wow, like right after this post, like you inspired me to go to Target and I picked up some cookies, and like share those kinds of comments as well, because I think they both are equally as important. And yeah. Oh, actually, the last thing I was going to say is that kind of like how Hannah was saying about how like, I think we also sometimes underestimate the power of organic social, of how it can lead to other bigger deals and kind of like with sponsorships and stuff like that. I mean, I would say within CPG, what's important is that, retailers are also watching what you're doing. So if you're making a post, you're not just doing it to, maybe be relatable to your audience of like, oh yeah, I go on a Target run to get cookies, but you're showing the retailer that as a brand, you're supporting them and you're getting more people to come into the store, and that you're creating a buzz that like kind of like a phenomenon of like, so I think if you can kind of make that tie back between like your work as in organic social and things you're posting, and even our sales team will sometimes be like, yeah, the Target buyer reached out and they saw this and they thought it was super cool. So those kinds of moments where you can kind of make it like where it is so much bigger than just a post on Instagram. At the end of the day, yes, it's a blessing and a curse that your work is public, but I think there's so much value in it that it can really kind of make so much more of an impact than you think.
I just want
But
to
yeah.
echo what Enara was saying. Be proactive. Don't wait for permission or for them to ask you for a report. Be proactive about what you're doing. Share your wins, because that is extremely important. Example we just had with my team, we did a community a reply, and it went bonkers. And one of the comments was, "You ate with that one." And we're plastering that. We're plastering that all over. We're sharing that win. And you know what? That leads to more awareness. That leads to more consideration. That leads to more loyalty, those types of things. So be proactive with sharing your wins and sharing what your team is doing that is laddering back up to those business goals.
Yeah, I love all that advice. Being proactive, being loud, and also knowing that social actually take yourself seriously as a social media manager, even though sometimes you're posting fun memes, it does affect the business. And the more you approach it of like, this is actually going to drive business outcomes and work to try to do that, you're gonna rise in your career. Okay, Alyssa, we're gonna bring Alyssa on to ask a question. This may be the last question we have time for, coming up on the hour pretty quickly. Alyssa, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, so my name is Alyssa. I am a kind of early in career marketing professional. And so I had a question kind of pertaining to that with like Gen Z. So how do you guys handle conflicting customer feedback among different customer segments and generations? Like top of mind, I'm thinking of kind of Gen Z's response to the Poppy with their vending machines and Duolingo's AI first campaign.
Great question.
I'm going to,
Josh.
as the non-Gen Zer on this call, I'm going to not, I'm going to defer to some of the.
I think that I will say that it feels like it's kind of just a larger sentiment that's going on right now that a lot of us can feel. Like, I think people are just kind of fatigued. You know, we get served so many ads, there's so much noise, there's so many brands. And I think kind of going back to that question of just like the trends, like sometimes you have to kind of make that distinguishment between as a brand of like, are you just trying to make noise and are you just trying to get quick virality versus like what are you trying to do long term? So I mean, to answer your question, I think it's just really being conscious of like as a brand, how you're choosing to show up. Like what is your true goal? Like is it the short term? Is it the long term? And for some brands, it's either or. I think having a kind of mix of the both can be kind of the most powerful, and also just yeah, like listening to your audience. Like your community will tell you how they feel about something, like you'll get direct feedback, and sometimes that, you know, like you're gonna mess up, like, and that's okay. You know, you take it as a learning experience and learn from other brands what has worked for them, what hasn't worked for them. And but always just remember that like you have to make it your own, right? Just because something did work for someone else or didn't doesn't mean it will for you. I don't know if that answers the question, but
A great answer. Yeah, sometimes it feels like brands can try too hard, and like what you said, consumers are getting so smart, so inundated, especially younger consumers. They know the game at this point, and they can see through some of that stuff. So trying to really think, and it goes back to community, right? Like, are you trying to just make a Super Bowl ad on social, which sometimes can work? Or are you trying to really engage your community and build off of that? And it's almost like less is more with some of that stuff sometimes. Okay, I think we'll have time for another. Alexander, do you want to come on and ask your question about AI?
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much. I guess I work in fintech and AI is everywhere, and the expectation is that it's everywhere. And in social, we all know that social is about people. And I think the question I'm most curious about is, where do you think AI could actually level up and give you an advantage versus where is the red line for you where it still needs to be person to person action?
Yeah.
Great question. Super top of mind. Josh, I know you're thinking a lot about AI at your agency.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. It's something that we're thinking about at Ogilvy a lot and investing a lot in. For me, the one thing that I always remind myself with AI is it doesn't have the heart, right? And that's the one thing, is that it will never replace the heart, the vibe, the gut that we all have. But it is here. It is not going anywhere. So all social pros have to understand how to use it and how to use it to their advantage. For me, it is incredibly valuable at distilling information. I have this huge document. How can I distill it down into a digestible one pager that I can use for my boss or for leadership? Can it help me brainstorm something? Hey, I'm trying to reach a Gen Z audience around a particular topic, around a particular campaign. Give me 5 insights that can help me to understand what platforms might be best for you, what platforms might be best, what kind of ideas we could share, and use it for brainstorming as a jumping off point. I would never have AI write copy for me unless it's introducing me, which ChatGPT did a very good job of, I guess. But you know, it is a jumping off point. It is not the end point. You have to make sure that there's a human element, because that is the one thing. It won't replace the human element. The context is huge. It will never understand certain context of if this community member is joking on your post. It might not understand that there's an inside joke there or a little bit of a humor twist. So it's a jumping off point that you can use to your advantage in helping you brainstorm, helping you develop outlines for strategy, reporting, insights. those types of things, and give you frameworks that you can use. But you have to know how to prompt it right. You have to know how to kind of continue to ask it questions. But the more that you can do that, the better you're going to be set up as it continues to make waves in social and become part of our everyday kind of profession in the profession.
Awesome answer. Enara, Hannah, any thoughts on AI that you want to add before we close out this webinar? The time flies. This has been really fun.
Yeah, it really does. I'm just gonna quickly add in that, there's a lot of like fear going around of like AI is coming for our jobs. And I think we are seeing that AI can do a lot of our jobs, but that doesn't mean it should, right? Like you can see now that AI would create an image in seconds that would take your marketing team like hours to kind of curate. Same thing with copywriting, same thing with coming up with ideas. And when you have a million things on your plate, it can be sort of easy to be like, oh, let me just have ChatGPT do it. But I personally found, and I think many of you can probably agree, that you went into this role because it's creative, right? And so I think that I actually have less satisfaction when ChatGPT just comes up with something for me. Like I enjoy the creativity, I enjoy the problem solving. So where I would say is try to use AI for the less exciting tasks, for the more boring tasks, right? Like helping you do a calculation when you're doing KPI reporting, or like coming up with a really long formatted email or something. I would say it's great as a starting point and great as an ending point. So if you need like initial ideas, then you take it from there. Or if you need like a last minute gut check before you post something, it's great. But I feel like, at least for me, I know I feel bogged down when it's like kind of taking away from my personal creativity.
100%. 100%. Okay, that's all the time we have. Unfortunately, I feel like we could talk for another hour easily and a lot more questions. We will send follow-ups over email. We'll try to answer some more of these questions just online over email on our LinkedIn. We do host these every second Wednesday of the month. So I don't even have my calendar up, but you guys can figure out when that is in June. We're going to keep doing these. These three guests will definitely be back on another social club, probably sometime this year if we can work it out with your schedules. Thank you all so much for the time and the insights. And thanks everybody for joining in on the conversation. We will see you next time.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, y'all.